Karen Wilkinson stood in her backyard, mouth agape, as water crept steadily across her pristine lawn. The carefully manicured grass, cut exactly to the Homeowners Association's mandated 2-inch height, was now submerged under 3 inches of murky water. Her prized rose bushes gurgled pathetically as they drowned. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she shrieked, whipping out her phone to document the disaster. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just yesterday, she filed complaints against 3 neighbors for infractions ranging from suspiciously tall grass to unauthorized wind chime installation. Now her own property looked like a swamp. The culprit was clear: the new drainage system the HOA had installed last month, the same project Karen had vehemently pushed for at every community meeting. "Property values will plummet if we don't address the standing water on Maple Street," she argued, pounding her fist on the meeting room table. The board had eventually caved, hiring the cheapest contractor Karen could find. Now that same system had redirected all of Maple Street's rainwater directly into her yard. Stomping through the muck in her designer gardening boots, Karen marched to her fence where Ted Harrison, her next-door neighbor and HOA board president, was casually watering his suspiciously lush vegetable garden. "Ted," she called out sharply. "Emergency HOA meeting. Now." Ted turned slowly, a smile playing at the edges of his mouth. "Why, good morning, Karen. Doing some irrigation." "This is sabotage, and you know it," Karen hissed. "That drainage system was supposed to protect our properties and not create a wildlife sanctuary in my yard." Ted shrugged, adjusting his straw hat. "The system is working exactly as designed. It's redirecting water away from the street, into my yard. The plans were approved by the board. You signed off on them yourself." Karen's face flushed crimson. She had indeed signed those plans without reading them, assuming her influence on the board meant nobody would dare design anything that might inconvenience her. "Fix it. Today." She turned to leave, then stopped. "And by the way, your tomato plants are 3 inches above regulation height. Expect a citation." Back inside her colonial-style home, Karen furiously scrolled through the HOA bylaws on her tablet. There had to be something she could use, some regulation that would force immediate action. Her husband, Greg, wandered in from his home office, coffee mug in hand. "Holy hell," he said, looking out at the newly formed pond. "Did we buy lakefront property and nobody told me?" "Not funny, Greg," Karen snapped. "This is Ted's revenge because I reported his Halloween decorations last year. He was still displaying skeletons on November 3rd. Greg sipped his coffee. "Well, what are you going to do?" Karen's eyes narrowed as a thought formed. If the HOA wouldn't fix this problem immediately, she would have to take matters into her own hands. The bylaws strictly prohibited unauthorized landscape modifications, but they also required properties to be maintained in presentable condition. "If they want to flood my yard," she said slowly, a dangerous smile spreading across her face, "then maybe it's time to embrace it." Greg recognized that look. It was the same expression Karen had worn before initiating the Great Christmas Light Dispute of 2021 and the infamous fence paint controversy of 2022. "Karen," he said cautiously, "whatever you're thinking." "Get me the number for that pool contractor," Karen interrupted, already mentally calculating how many HOA violations she could file against Ted while construction was underway. "If they want water in my yard, I'll give them water." The pool contractor, a weathered man named Frank with 4 arms like tree trunks, stood ankle-deep in Karen's flooded yard, nodding thoughtfully as he surveyed the scene. "Could work," he mused, scribbling notes. "The natural depression here actually saves us excavation costs. Water table's already high, so—" Karen wasn't listening to the technical details. Her mind raced with visions of the emergency HOA meeting she'd called for that evening. She imagined herself unveiling architectural drawings of an elegant pool that would become the neighborhood's crown jewel and a permanent reminder of the board's incompetence. "I need it fast," she interrupted. "How quickly can you start?" Frank scratched his stubbled chin. "Ma'am, there are permits, utility checks, HOA approvals." "I'll handle the HOA," Karen said dismissively. "Just give me a quote by this afternoon." As Frank continued his assessment, Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Diane, the HOA secretary. "Emergency meeting canceled. Drainage issues deem individual property matters per bylaw 7.3. Karen's grip tightened around her phone. Individual property matters? Individual property matters? She thrust the screen toward Frank, who took an instinctive step back. "They redirected a river into my yard." "Ma'am, I just build pools," Frank said carefully. Karen took a deep breath, straightening her linen blouse. "How much to start immediately? Today?" Frank named a figure that made Karen wince, but she nodded curtly. "Done. And I need something else, the most spectacular water feature you've ever built. Something visible from the street and Ted Harrison's backyard." That evening, the Wilkinson dining room had transformed into a war room. Blueprints covered the mahogany table as Karen outlined her strategy to Greg and their increasingly concerned teenage daughter, Zoe. "Mom," Zoe groaned, "you can't just build a pool without permission. Even I know that's like against HOA rules." "Actually," Karen said, tapping a highlighted section of the bylaws, "emergency water mitigation is permitted under Section 12.4. And since the board refused to address my water situation, I'm simply taking approved measures." Greg examined the blueprints. A waterfall, 3 water cannons. "Karen, this isn't water mitigation, it's aquatic warfare." "The waterfall serves a critical aeration function," Karen replied primly, "and the cannons are for cleaning purposes." The doorbell rang and Karen rushed to answer it. Ted stood on her porch, holding an official-looking envelope. "Notice of violation," he said, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Unauthorized standing water. You have 48 hours to correct the issue before daily fines begin." Karen accepted the envelope with a smile that unnerved Ted. "Thank you for your concern, Ted. I'm addressing it as we speak." "Also," Ted added, "several neighbors have reported unusual contractor activity at your property. I trust you're not planning unauthorized modifications." "Emergency water mitigation, Ted. Bylaw 12.4. Karen's smile widened. "I already documented the flooding. Would you like to see the pictures? Or perhaps the contractor's assessment of the damage caused by our new drainage system?" Ted's smugness faltered. "Any modifications require board review." "I'll be submitting everything properly," Karen assured him. "After the emergency measures are complete, of course." After closing the door on Ted's concerned face, Karen returned to the dining room, a new determination in her step. "Frank starts tomorrow at 7, she announced. "And I've decided to add underwater lighting, colored lights, visible from Ted's bedroom window." Greg exchanged a worried glance with Zoe. "Karen, are you sure about this? The fines could be substantial." Karen's expression hardened as she looked out at her drowned garden. "Some things, Greg, are worth fighting for." What neither Karen nor her family realized was that her decision that evening would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just their backyard, but the entire Maple Creek Estates community and Karen herself, in ways no one could have predicted. At precisely 6:59 the next morning, 3 heavy-duty trucks rumbled down the quiet street of Maple Creek Estates. Karen stood ready in her driveway, clipboard in hand, wearing what Zoe had dubbed her battle cardigan, a cashmere sweater reserved for HOA confrontations and parent-teacher conferences. Frank's crew moved with surprising efficiency, unloading equipment as curious neighbors peered from behind curtains and over fences. By 8:15, a small excavator was churning through Karen's sodden lawn, transforming her once pristine backyard into a mud pit that resembled a miniature war zone. "Mrs. Wilkinson," Marjorie Fletcher called from the sidewalk, her morning power walk interrupted by the spectacle. "What on earth is happening?" "The noise ordinance clearly states." "Emergency water mitigation," Marjorie, Karen replied smoothly, handing her neighbor a laminated copy of Bylaw 12.4. "I'm simply following protocol for the catastrophic flooding caused by our new drainage system." Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't look like simple mitigation." "I'd be happy to show you the standing water that destroyed my prize-winning roses," Karen offered. "The same roses that won the garden tour you organized last spring." Marjorie's expression softened with genuine grief for the lost roses. "Such a shame. Those Chrysler Imperials were magnificent." "Indeed," Karen sighed dramatically. "But we must soldier on. By the way, I noticed your garage door seems to be Navajo white rather than the approved eggshell whisper. Just thought you should know before someone files a report." Marjorie retreated quickly, leaving Karen to oversee the growing chaos in her yard. By noon, a substantial hole had been excavated, and the genuine excitement Karen felt surprised her. For years, she channeled her organizational energy into HOA enforcement, finding satisfaction in maintaining order through rules and citations. Now she was creating something, even if that something had sprung from spite. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing all morning. Text messages from board members, emails about emergency meetings, and even a formal cease and desist letter that Karen promptly forwarded to her cousin Stephanie, a litigation attorney who specialized in property disputes. Ted arrived just after lunch, accompanied by 2 other board members. They stood at the edge of Karen's property, arms crossed, as she approached them with a placid smile. "This is unacceptable," Ted began, his face flushed. "The board never approved this construction." "Actually," Karen countered, "I've documented the flooding caused by the board-approved drainage system, applied the emergency mitigation provision under Bylaw 12.4, and submitted all required paperwork electronically this morning. I even used the new form template you insisted we adopt last month." She handed each of them a thick folder containing before and after photos of her yard, engineer's assessments, and highlighted copies of relevant bylaws. "This isn't mitigation," Ted sputtered, flipping through the documents. "You're building a swimming pool. A water retention and management system," Karen corrected, "with filtration capabilities. And those—" Board member Deborah pointed to a delivery truck arriving with what appeared to be 3 large cannon-shaped objects. "Directional water circulation devices," Karen explained, "essential for preventing mosquito breeding and maintaining proper water quality. Health and safety, Deborah. I'm surprised you overlooked such critical public health concerns." As the confrontation continued, Frank approached with an update. "Ma'am, we hit bedrock earlier than expected. Good news, better foundation. Bad news, jackhammer noise for the rest of the day." "Noise violation," Ted exclaimed triumphantly. "Emergency services exemption," Karen countered without missing a beat. "Section 5.2, paragraph C. Would you like me to get my copy?" As the board members retreated to consult with the HOA's attorney, Greg arrived home early from work, stopping dead in his tracks at the sight of their transformed property. "My God," he murmured. "You're really doing this?" Karen watched as the crew lowered concrete forms into the excavation. No turning back now. That evening, as the construction team departed, promising to return at 7 a.m. sharp, Karen sat on her patio surveying the day's progress. The enormity of what she'd initiated was finally sinking in. This wasn't just about getting back at Ted or circumventing HOA rules. She was creating something permanent, something that would change her home forever. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. What if this escalated beyond her control? What if the fines became unsurmountable? What if? Her phone chimed with a neighborhood alert. "Violation notice. 347 Maple Creek Lane. Unauthorized water feature installation." Karen's resolve hardened instantly. She tapped out a reply to the entire neighborhood mailing list. "Courageinaction. 347 Maple Creek Lane. Emergency water mitigation in progress per bylaw 12.4. Pool warming party to follow completion. All invited except current board members." She could send, then turned to Greg with a smile. "We'll need to order pool furniture. Something tasteful but visible from the street." By day 3 of construction, battle lines had been clearly drawn throughout Maple Creek Estates. The neighborhood had split into factions. Team Karen, composed of residents who had their own grievances with the HOA board. Team Ted, loyal rule followers who viewed Karen's project as anarchy. And a nervous neutral contingent who kept their blinds drawn and refused to sign any petitions. Karen had not anticipated becoming a revolutionary leader, but she embraced the role with characteristic intensity. Her dining room now served as coalition headquarters, where supporters gathered to share HOA horror stories and contribute to the pool defense fund Karen had established through an online fundraising site. "They cited me for having a bird feeder 6 inches too low," lamented Rajesh from 2 streets over. "I measured it 3 times. My application to replace my mailbox was rejected twice because the shade of black wasn't historically accurate," added Eleanor, an elderly woman who had lived in the community since its founding. Karen nodded sympathetically while updating her spreadsheet of board violations and inconsistencies. What had begun as personal retaliation was evolving into something more meaningful, a grassroots movement against petty tyranny. The irony that she had once been the neighborhood's most feared rule enforcer wasn't lost on her, but she chose not to dwell on it. Outside, the pool or water management system, as Karen insisted on calling it in all official correspondence, was taking shape rapidly. The concrete shell had been poured, plumbing was being installed, and the water cannons, now officially designated as circulation enhancers, were positioned strategically along the pool's edge, including one aimed precisely at the spot where Ted liked to enjoy his morning coffee on his back patio. The HOA board had escalated matters by calling an emergency Saturday meeting to amend bylaw 12.4, closing the loophole Karen had exploited. Karen attended the meeting with Stephanie, her attorney cousin, who eloquently argued that retroactive rule changes targeting specific homeowners constituted selective enforcement. Furthermore, Stephanie concluded, addressing the PAC Community Center, "My client has extensive documentation of the board's negligence in addressing the drainage issues that necessitated these emergency measures. Should the board persist in harassment, we are prepared to file a civil suit naming individual board members." The tension in the room was palpable as Ted had called for a vote on the amendment. Karen held her breath, mentally calculating which homeowners might side with her. The final tally stunned everyone. The amendment failed by 2 votes. Karen had won this round. As she left the meeting, residents approached her from all sides, some to congratulate her, others to criticize, but most simply curious about when the pool would be finished. "You started something dangerous here," Ted mourned, catching up to her in the parking lot. "This community functions because we have rules." "No, Ted," Karen replied, surprising herself with her calm tone. "This community functions because of people. The rules are supposed to serve us, not the other way around." That afternoon, Karen found an unexpected ally in Zoe, who had initially been mortified by her mother's crusade. The teenager approached Karen as she reviewed tile samples for the pool's border. So Zoe began awkwardly. Megan's parents think what you're doing is pretty cool. Her dad's been wanting to paint their front door blue for years but was afraid of getting fined. Karen looked up, genuinely surprised. Thomas and Patricia read, but they always seem so boring. Zoe offered with a slight smile. Yeah, turns out they hate the HOA rules too. Everyone does. They just didn't want to be the first to say it. For the first time, Karen considered the possibility that her neighbors viewed her not as the community guardian she'd imagined herself to be, but as an enforcer to be feared. The thought was uncomfortable and she pushed it aside. Well, she said briskly, what do you think of these tiles for the pool edge? The blue marble or the sandstone? Zoe studied the samples. Neither. Everyone does neutral colors because they're scared of standing out. Why not something different? Like these, she suggested, pointing to a sample of vibrant mosaic tiles Karen had dismissed as too bold. Karen examined the colorful tiles with new eyes. You know what? You're right. Let's make a statement. As the day ended, Frank presented Karen with an updated timeline. The pool would be completed within a week, barring any interference. Karen nodded, a strange mix of emotions washing over her. What had begun as revenge was becoming something more significant, a redefining of her place in the community and perhaps, though she wasn't ready to admit it yet, of herself. That night, as Greg and Zoe slept, Karen sat alone on the edge of the half-completed pool, feet dangling into the empty concrete shell. The moon cast strange shadows across what had once been her pride of obsessively maintained lawn. She found herself wondering what else in her carefully controlled life might be worth destructing. Day 6 of construction brought crisis. Karen awoke to find a stop work order taped to her front door and a county inspector standing in her driveway, clipboard in hand. Beside him stood Ted, arms crossed, wearing the smug expression Karen had come to despise. Permit irregularities, the inspector explained apologetically. Someone filed a complaint that your project exceeds residential water feature limitations. Karen maintained her composure, though inwardly she was calculating how many of Ted's family photos she could fit into her document shredder. May I see the specific violations? The inspector handed over a form with multiple check boxes. Karen scanned it quickly, her real estate background allowing her to spot the administrative overreach immediately. This cites commercial pool regulations, but this is a residential property. The size and water circulation system specifications triggered commercial classification, the inspector explained. Actually, Karen countered, pulling out her phone, according to County Code 47.32, which I bookmarked, residential water features are classified by property size ratio, not absolute dimensions. She brought up the relevant section and showed the inspector. My water feature occupies less than the maximum percentage allowed for residential properties in this zone. The inspector frowned, reviewing the regulation. Ted's expression soured as he realized Karen had done her homework thoroughly. There's also the matter of the unusual components, the inspector added, gesturing toward the water cannons. Circulation enhancers, Karen corrected. Fully compliant with residential equipment standards. I have the manufacturer's specifications and safety certifications if you'd like to review them. The inspection turned into an hour-long negotiation that ended with a compromise. Construction could continue with minor modifications to the water cannon pressure systems. As the inspector left, Karen turned to Ted. Nice try. Ted's facade of civic concern dropped. This isn't over, Karen. That monstrosity violates the aesthetic harmony our community was founded on. Aesthetic harmony? Karen laughed. Is that what we're calling beach tyranny now? You know what, Ted? I used to be just like you. I thought rules were what made a community special. But now I see they're just tools for people like us to control our neighbors. People like us, Ted repeated, startled by her candor. Control freaks, Karen clarified. I'm just beginning to realize it about myself. The difference is I'm trying to change. The confrontation with the inspector had delayed construction, but it also crystallized something for Karen. This pool, this act of rebellion, was becoming a symbol of transformation, not just for her yard, but for herself. That afternoon, the situation escalated further when Karen discovered that someone had turned off the water to her property. A call to the utility company confirmed it wasn't their doing, which left only one possibility: sabotage. Security camera footage revealed Ted and board member Douglas tampering with her water main the previous night. Karen considered calling the police, but instead opted for a more strategic approach. She invited local news reporter Lindsay Chen, whose request to install solar panels had been repeatedly denied by the HOA, to do a feature on community conflicts in residential governance. The resulting news segment aired that evening. Suburban standoff: when homeowners associations go too far. The piece featured interviews with multiple residents sharing stories of HOA overreach, footage of Karen's flooded yard before construction, and most devastatingly for Ted, the security camera video of the water main tampering. By nightfall, Karen's phone was buzzing constantly with messages of support, news outlets requesting interviews, and an email from a property rights attorney offering pro bono representation. What had begun as a neighborhood dispute was transforming into a local movement. Even Greg, who had maintained cautious neutrality throughout the ordeal, was showing signs of conversion. "I just got 3 calls from clients who saw the news," he told Karen that evening. "They all said the same thing. Your wife is my hero." Karen smiled, but her victory felt complicated. For years, she'd been the neighborhood's most vigilant rule enforcer, filing complaints for infractions as minor as holiday decorations left up one day too long. Now she was being celebrated for defiance. The contradiction made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite articulate. That night, unable to sleep, Karen ventured outside to check on the pool's progress. The concrete shell was complete, the plumbing installed, and the mosaic tiles Zoe had suggested were stacked neatly for tomorrow's work. In the moonlight, Karen could envision the finished project, bold, beautiful, and utterly unlike anything else in the carefully controlled aesthetic of Maple Creek Estates. As she stood contemplating her creation, a motion-activated security light flashed on in Ted's yard. Through the fence slats, Karen could see him standing on his patio, also unable to sleep, staring at the pool in progress. Their eyes met briefly through the fence. Neither spoke, but something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that their conflict had moved beyond water drainage or HOA bylaws into something more personal for them both. Karen turned away first, walking back toward her house with a strange new thought forming. What if this wasn't just about winning anymore? What if it was about finding a better way for all of them to live together? On the day before the pool's completion, Karen received an unexpected visitor. Marjorie Fletcher, HOA board treasurer and Ted's most loyal ally, stood on her doorstep looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "May I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if worried about being seen. Karen ushered her into the living room, curiosity overriding suspicion. Marjorie declined refreshments and got straight to the point. "There's something you should see," she said, sliding a folder across the coffee table. "I've been reviewing the HOA financial records as part of my treasurer duties, and I found irregularities." Karen opened the folder to find contracts, invoices, and bank statements related to the drainage project. As she scanned the documents, her eyes widened. "The contractor who installed the drainage system is Ted's brother-in-law," Marjorie explained. The board wasn't informed of this relationship, and the contract was awarded without competitive bidding, despite our bylaws requiring at least 3 quotes for any project over $10,000. Karen flipped through more pages, her property management background allowing her to quickly spot the padded costs and questionable charges. "This is substantial." Marjorie nodded grimly. "There's more. The system was deliberately designed to divert water away from certain properties, including Ted's, at the expense of others. Your yard was specifically targeted because you pushed hardest for the project." "Why are you showing me this?" Karen asked, genuinely puzzled by Marjorie's betrayal of Ted. Marjorie sighed. "Because this community used to be about more than property values and paint colors. When my husband died last year, Ted was concerned about whether my landscaper was using the approved grass seed blend. You were the only one who brought me meals for 2 weeks straight." Karen felt a pang of emotion she hadn't expected. In her zealous enforcement of rules, she had forgotten why she initially joined the HOA, to build a community where people looked out for each other. "What do you want me to do with this information?" Karen asked. "That's up to you," Marjorie replied, "but the annual board election is next month and nominations open tomorrow." After Marjorie left, Karen sat alone, contemplating the documents before her. She could use this information to utterly destroy Ted's reputation and position in the community. It would be sweet revenge for the flooding, the stop work order, and years of condescending treatment. Yet something held her back. The past 2 weeks had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The pool, her act of rebellion, had connected her with neighbors she'd previously seen only as potential rule breakers. She discovered a community hungry for change but afraid to challenge the status quo. Karen was still deep in thought when Frank arrived for their final pre-completion consultation. "We're ahead of schedule," he announced cheerfully. "Water goes in tomorrow, and then it's party time." "About that," Karen said slowly, "I've been thinking about the design. I'd like to make one final change." Frank looked concerned. "Ma'am, at this stage, major changes would delay completion significantly and increase costs." "It's important," Karen insisted, grabbing a pencil to sketch her idea. "What if we added a gate here and a fence between my yard and Ted's, with proper safety measures, of course, and extended the deck area to create a shared space?" Frank stared at her as if she'd suggested filling the pool with chocolate pudding. You want to share the pool with the neighbor you've been at war with? Not exactly, Karen replied. I need to think about this more. Let's stick to the original plan for now, but don't finalize the landscaping on that side yet. That evening, Karen called an informal meeting of her supporters at her home. As they gathered in her living room, a diverse group ranging from young families to retirees, she felt a strange new confidence that had nothing to do with rules or control. I call you here because we need to talk about next steps, she began. Tomorrow, my pool will be finished. The board has essentially given up trying to stop it, but this was never just about my pool. She laid out what she had learned about the drainage contract and Ted's conflict of interest, then surprised everyone with what came next. I'm not going to expose this publicly, she announced. Instead, I'm going to run for HOA president in next month's election. Not to enforce rules more strictly, but to change how we govern ourselves as neighbors. The room erupted in discussion. Some wanted immediate justice for Ted's actions. Others were excited about the possibility of reform. Karen let the conversation flow, something the old Karen would never have allowed. As the meeting concluded, Rajesh raised an important question. What about your pool? The one pointing water cannons at Ted's patio? Karen smiled. I'm thinking it might need a few modifications, less aquatic warfare and more community resource. After everyone left, Karen stood alone in her backyard, watching the sunset reflect off the empty pool that had consumed her life for the past 2 weeks. Tomorrow would be filled with water, completing her transformation from rule enforcer to rule breaker. But perhaps, she thought, there was a third option, neither enforcing nor breaking, but reimagining the rules altogether, creating a system that protected the community while still allowing for individual expression and human connection. Greg joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Penny, for your thoughts? I'm thinking, Karen said slowly, that sometimes you have to break something to fix it properly. The pool? No, Karen replied, watching as lights came on in neighboring houses, including Ted's, something much bigger than that. The day of the pool's completion dawned bright and clear, as if the weather itself approved of Karen's project. By noon, water flowed into the concrete shell, christening what had become the most controversial structure in Maple Creek Estate's 15-year history. Karen stood alongside Frank, watching the pool fill inch by inch. The vibrant mosaic tiles Zoe had selected sparkled in the sunlight, creating patterns that shifted and danced as the water level rose. It was beautiful, far more striking than anything Karen would have chosen before this ordeal began. Congratulations, Frank said, offering his hand. Most interesting residential project I've had in 20 years, and definitely the most determined client. As they shook hands, Karen noticed Ted watching from his side of the fence. She excused herself and walked over, stopping a few feet from the property line that had become their battlefield. It's quite something, Ted admitted grudgingly. Not exactly HOA approved, but beautiful, Karen finished for him. Ted, we need to talk. Not as HOA president and chronic rule breaker, but as neighbors. Ted's expression remained guarded, but he nodded. I'm listening. I know about the drainage contract, Karen said quietly. Your brother-in-law's company, the inflated costs, the deliberate design to flood certain properties, including mine. Ted's face drained of color. Karen, I can explain. You don't need to, she interrupted, because I'm not going to expose you. Confusion replaced fear on Ted's face. Why not? It's the perfect ammunition. Karen considered the question carefully. 2 weeks ago, she would have used this information without hesitation, destroying Ted's reputation while cementing her own position as community watchdog. That version of Karen felt increasingly distant. Because it wouldn't solve anything, she finally replied. It would just continue the cycle, you enforcing rules on me retaliating, everyone taking sides. The neighborhood would stay divided. She gestured toward her pool. I built this out of spite, Ted. I wanted to break your rules, create an eyesore, make you as miserable as I was when my yard flooded. But somewhere along the way, I realized something important. What's that? Ted asked, his defensiveness fading into genuine curiosity. That I've been as much the problem as you have, Karen admitted. I've spent years reporting neighbors for trivial violations, judging everyone by how well they conform to rules that I didn't even create. Rules that squeeze the life and individuality out of this community. Ted was silent for a long moment. So what are you proposing instead? Partnership, Karen said. I'm running for HOA president next month. If I win, I want you to stay on the board, not as my adversary, but as someone who brings a different perspective. We need balance, not tyranny from either side. Ted's laugh held more surprise than humor. You want to work with me? After everything. Especially after everything, Karen confirmed. Also, I'd like to cut a gate between our properties. My pool, your expertise in community management. We could start hosting neighborhood events beginning with a completion party next weekend. Ted stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. You're serious? Completely, Karen assured him. Oh, and I'm having the water cannons removed, or at least redirected away from your patio. Later that afternoon, as the pool filling neared completion, Karen gathered her family on their new deck. Greg was grilling burgers, Zoe was taking photos for social media, and Karen was finalizing details for the neighborhood pool party she decided to host. "So Ted actually agreed?" Greg asked, flipping a burger with practice ease. "Tentatively," Karen replied. "He's coming over tomorrow to discuss the shared gate proposal. I think he's still half convinced this is an elaborate trap." "Can you blame him?" Zoe asked, looking up from her phone. "You two have been at war since we moved here." Karen smiled wryly. "Fair point, but people can change." "Speaking of change," Greg said, nodding toward the street, "looks like you have more visitors." A small group of neighbors was gathering at the edge of their driveway, some holding casserole dishes and bottles of wine. Karen recognized supporters from her living room meetings, but also several neutrals and even a couple from Ted's faction. Marjorie stepped forward as Karen approached. "We thought you might like to celebrate. It's not every day someone stands up to the HOA and wins." "It's not about winning anymore," Karen said, inviting them all inside the gate. "It's about finding a better way forward, together." As the impromptu gathering grew, neighbors who had barely spoken in years found themselves sharing food, stories, and laughter around Karen's controversial pool. Children begged to dip their feet in the water, and after checking with Frank that it was safe, Karen allowed it, watching with satisfaction as the pool became not just a symbol of her rebellion, but a center of community connection. Evening fell and solar-powered lights along the pool's edge, definitely not HOA approved, created a magical atmosphere. Karen found a quiet moment to slip away, taking in the transformation of her backyard and herself. Eleanor, the community's oldest resident, joined her. "Quite the revolution you started, my dear." Karen smiled. "Not a revolution, an evolution." "Whatever you call it," Eleanor said, "it was long overdue. This place used to be about people, not property values. Maybe it can be again." The following morning, Karen awoke early and stood by her pool in the dawn light. The water was still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. In a few hours, Ted would arrive to discuss their tentative truce and plans for the